So, Dave, I got to tell you about this. I was driving in Philadelphia not so long ago, and I pull up to an intersection. It's a stop light. I've got a red light. I pull up. I'm the first one in line.
Great.
And I'm at the stoplight. And somebody pulls up behind me, and I can see in the rearview mirror that she's on her phone. She is absolutely, completely, her head is down. She has no idea that she's in a motor vehicle. Her thumbs are going bop-a-da-bop-a-da-bop-a-da-bop all over the place. She's texting like crazy. And I am watching this play out because, again, she is completely distracted. And I'm telling you, distracted people, you should not be behind the wheel. She's distracted. She's texting and texting. I'm watching this in the rearview mirror, just absolutely obsessed with this person that has stopped realizing that they're driving in traffic. And I'm getting madder and madder at this person. They're still texting. All of a sudden, a horn honks, Dave. I look up, my light's been green for 30 seconds.
I gotta tell you, I saw where it was going and I loved it nonetheless.
So I'm telling you, distracted drivers should not be behind the wheel.
I gotta tell you, I know a personality type that should not be behind the wheel, and I'm sharing a podcast with them. And on that note, I'm gonna say hello, everybody, and welcome to ComicLab, the show about Brad distractedly making comics.
And the show about Brad distractedly making a living from comics. I'm Brad, I'm that Brad. I'm the author of the Webcomics Handbook and the creator of Evil Inc.
And I'm his pal Dave Kellett, cartoonist of Drive and Sheldon and co-director of the comics documentary Stripped.
And this week's Hour of Comics Advice is made possible by your support at patreon.com/ComicLab. So Dave, let's talk comics.
Let's talk comics, my friend. And a reminder to everybody that this show is going out live right now to our friends and backers over at patreon.com/ComicLab at the live gab level every week I do that. Live gab, gab level. Oh my God, why I didn't even want to go slow? Why does that happen? I turn into a 4-year-old trying to say the word kindergarten. Okay, what is it?
It's live gab level.
Live gab. I can't say it. I got to come up with something else. Anyway, the show's going out live to our friends on ComicLab at Live Gab over at Patreon. You can watch the show live every week, and it's also recorded and archived. So if you miss it one week, you can watch the archives that are kept safe and sound for you to watch. And I'm giving a wave over there. And Brad, what do we got for this week's show?
Oh, we've got a great question. I love this question because it really gets to the heart of some deeper issues in comics. So listen to this. This comes in from our friend Alan Gladfelter, who says, I'd like to hear what you guys have to say about the use and overuse of Photoshop and Clip Studio brushes and how to manage and limit their uses. I've been starting the long, steep learning curve of coloring my comics, and there are just so many brushes. I find myself scrolling through the endless menus of brushes, and I have a hard time keeping track of what I'm doing, what I've used in the past, and where I last saw them. Also, some of these brushes are like magic, just a swipe and bang, a whole tree. Am I getting into the territory of letting the computer make my creative decisions for me? And is that necessarily a bad thing? So, Dave, let's talk about brushes. You and I are both doing comics digitally. You are more on the Photoshop side of things. I'm more on the Clip Studio side of things. Right. But we're both doing digital art, and we're both very aware of the amount that digital brushes can really expand what we do. Talk about that. Is that a bad thing? Let's say, because there's two questions: staying organized and is this okay? Let's take the second question first. Digital brushes, where do you stand?
Well, there's a couple of things to talk about here, which is in the course of our careers, Brad, we went from when we started, if we're honest about it, there was like 10 or 15 stock brushes. Yeah. And they were what you were. It was like that thing you tell kids, you get what you get and you don't get upset, you know? Yeah. And so with digital brushes, when we were starting, you're like, well, I guess I'm drawing with this brush. That's it. And I have to say, to Adobe's great credit and to CSP's great credit, we now have an absolute plethora of brushes to choose from. I mean, sometimes it's like 20 scrolls long if you look at the new Adobe pack, if you download all the options and stuff. Yeah. And all the more so since they hired Kyle Webster to be their brush designer. Kyle, by the way, was the one that I forgot, I think on last week's show, the name, Kyle Webster. And I used to buy all his brushes when he flew solo, and then Adobe brought him in-house. So now they're in the CS package, the cloud package, sorry. And they're amazing. There's hundreds and hundreds of brushes in there. And so the first thing I would suggest to you is to get organized. And in Photoshop, you can folderize brushes and then name them. And so I and by that I mean digitally. You can also, I've done this with my in my studio. Beth and I used to print out and produce. Here's what the brush looks like. Here's the name of the brush, but here's the stroke that the brush creates. Because often, Brad, the sort of imprimatur that shows what the brush looks like, quote unquote, as a design is not in any way what you're going to get when you when you do the brush stroke. And all you need to do in your mind's eye is imagine what a traditional dry brush looks like. What it looks like is a bunch of semi-dry individual bristles, right? So it's a bunch of individual pinpricks. But if you brush that across the page, it creates a very wave-like, brush-like format. And so that's what I'm getting at, is that you need to know both what the brush is designed to look like and what the final result of the brush is. And so for that, we created a printout with little flip pages. So you can be like, that's the brush I want.
Yeah.
So that's number one, is get digitally organized. You can rename your brushes. You can categorize them like, hey, these are good manga backgrounds, or hey, these are good organic brushes for trees and leaves and grass. These are good, say mechanical type brushes that are good for buildings or brick or steel or plastic, right? And so in such a way, you can sort of start to winnow down the 300 plus brushes that Adobe offers to get a more manageable package.
Absolutely. And you can organize brushes in Clip Studio as well. You can put them into what they call a sub-tool group, and you can organize your brushes, create names for those tools. I will also add, not only doing that, but like if I've got very specific settings for a brush, for example, I've got a character that has like Green Lantern-esque powers, and to make his powers manifest, I've got a certain style that those things, that energy comes out of his body as. Right. So what I'll do is on my sketch layer, I'll just make a note. I'll just write it on the sketch layer. This is the blankety blank brush at 30% opacity with a 25 pixel brush, right?
Yep.
I'll just write it, scrawl it right there in the sketch layer of my object. And now if I'm going back months later to that character, I can go back to where he appeared. I know I'm going to find it right there in his first sketch layer, and I'll have my notes.
Well, and just piggybacking on Brad's great idea, Brad writes it in that layer. I've also done it where I have named the layer, the brush, the style, and the opacity, all the settings. Brilliant. So it literally says this layer is done with, like puffy cloud at 32 opacity, this much pressure, but it's the same idea that Brad has, which is capture the knowledge so that you don't have to recreate the wheel every time you need to make a car, that kind of thing. And both of those are great ideas. And then the other thing is, I would actually highly recommend setting aside a Saturday where you're not actually doing a project. You can have something in mind, like I'm going to draw a tree today, but you literally just go down and experiment. And then as you find brushes that you like, you star them, you write them down. Whether it's a physical note taking on a piece of paper or whether it's moving things into a folder digitally, you can start to organize. And in so doing, you don't feel crushed within a project. Like, I also got to find brushes. It's a Saturday. You got some coffee. You're maybe watching something on the TV as you're fiddling. And it's a nice way to sort of figure out the brushes.
Absolutely. Now, for my process, I only use like one or two brushes in general while I'm drawing. I've got one brush that is a pencil tool that I typically use for sketching, and I've got an inking brush, and that's it that I basically use. However, when it comes to those other brushes, the ones that do a lot of like image work, like I've got a brush that can draw an octopus tentacle. All right. I've got that brush that'll draw a tree. I've got a brush that'll draw leaves
or hair
for that tree. Right. And I know there's a lot of guilt from our digital artists when we use those tools, because it's like, oh my gosh, am I even an artist anymore? I just made I did a guy jumping out of a window once, Dave. and I found a shattered glass brush in Clip Studio.
Oh, really?
And it drew shattered glass. So basically, this guy is jumping out of a window. There's this amazing spray of shattered glass. It took me 3 strokes. Yink, yink, wonk, done. And it was incredible. I would have been sitting there drawing shattered glass for an afternoon. And of course, you know what happens, and unless you're a very different person than me, after about the 3rd piece of shattered glass, I get really bored drawing shattered glass. So every piece after that gets a little bit less detailed, a little bit more sloppy. By the time it looks like it's not shattered glass, it looks like he's got a bowl of soup that he just threw into the air, and it's all gloppy. I know I would not have done a good job on that, but this tool enabled me to do a good job. Now, that goes back to, are you an artist if you're using a shattered glass tool? And it goes back to this age-old, as long as digital art's been around, is it okay to do things like copy and paste? Is it okay to copy and paste?
I'll go even further. It's an argument that goes back to Vermeer and Da Vinci and their devices that they use to try to recreate the world on a painted canvas, which is like, well, Vermeer's cheating. He's using a light-based, camera oscura, or Da Vinci's using a camera oscura. The thing is, everyone, the critics want to find a cheat as to why you're not an artist. Yeah. But the thing is, that is only a tool. And it's the correct application of Brad using the tool to make the glass look pleasing, to make that glass fall correctly in the negative space, to make the glass have the energy of shattering in a way that character is coming through the glass. Yeah. That takes an artist's eye. So it's still artistic. So I sense and share that feeling that certain brushes can feel like cheating, and some are so complete that you're like, all right, well, that is cheating. Like you hit a brush and it's like, there's the tree, the pasture, the cow, and you're like, well, wait a minute, I didn't draw any of that. So yes, I get that sense, but there's also ones that can do, I don't know, like fall leaves that are gently billowing down in the breeze, and I can see how a manga artist who is setting their story in the fall at a college campus, and all the characters are walking across the quad, it's really handy to have fall leaves that you can have in the background. It's a tertiary read in the background. It's not super critical, but and because remember, necessity is the mother of invention here, and manga schedules, especially with CSP, created all this because people needed ways to produce these books at these superhuman schedules that literally cause heart attacks in Japan. So they created all these brushes that can kind of speed things along. It is a tool. You can feel as guilty or not as guilty as you want to do, but I think Brad and I would suggest if you're doing it in an artistic way and editing and refining and forming, then you're using it the correct way.
Can I just flip over all the cards and get to the real important thing? Your readers don't freaking care if you used a Clip Studio brush to make that shattered glass or those falling leaves. Your readers don't care, right? The only people that care are other comics artists who want to torture each other, right? Because you do see some comics artists that are like, well, I never reuse a panel. I never clip and paint. I saw one guy says it's okay to reuse a sketch, but all those inks, those should be fresh. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Redrawing a panel, like we've all done panels where we've got a repeated scene, right? And there's a change that, or actually, in many cases, if it's like a penultimate silent panel, for example, that panel is exactly the same because you want to show a heartbeat in there. You want to show just a little bit of a push. You want to build anticipation. You want to build narrative tension. So you've got that same panel twice. I'm supposed to draw that same panel twice? Are you kidding me? While the copy and paste button is sitting right there on my keyboard? Nothing could be a worse use of my time, and your readers don't care. Your readers just care about a good comic in front of them. That's all the only people that care if you copy and pasted is other artists who like to torture each other with this machismo of, I always draw every panel. Well, listen, you can use your time however you want. I know for me, that shattered glass, not for nothing, meant that I had time to spend with my family that night. Instead of sitting there drawing shattered glass, I had time for my life. And I was able to do a good comic, an amazing scene, and I had time for my family. I win. There's no way. There's no other way. You can slice this down. I win that competition. Now, having said all of that, let's pull it back just a little bit, because there is a danger when you get into copy and paste that you can overuse it and your panels start to look repetitive and dull. Yes. And you do see this sometimes where you can almost hear the artist saying, well, I changed the eyes and I changed the mouth, so it's a new panel. It's a new panel. I changed the eyes, I changed the mouth. And it's like, well, wait a minute there, hop along. There's a lot more ways. There's a lot more ways that you can make that scene expressive than just changing the eyes and just changing the mouth. There's gesture, there's posture, there's camera angle, there's lighting. You can get, it is possible to get lazy with things like copy and paste. And it is possible to get lazy with things like Clip Studio brushes or Photoshop brushes, but you should never, ever think twice about using them responsibly and using them creatively, because at the end of the day, your readers aren't giving you extra points. Your reader never has asked you, hey, or better yet, nobody in the history of comics has ever said, you got to read this comic. It took the artist 5 hours per page to do this comic. And you got to read it, because I read a comic last week that was only 4 hours and 20 minutes, was no good. It was only it was only 4 hours and 20. How good could it be? But I read this one, 5 hours a page. You're going to love it. Nobody's ever said that. Nobody's ever said that. All they care about is what's on the page or on the screen in front of them. That's all they care about. So if using that brush allows you to go out and enjoy your life, you win.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit like that scene in Gladiator where, no matter what you've done to create a comic, you present it to the crowd and you're like, are you not entertained? Did you, do you like the comic or not? Like, that's all that matters. But I do want to say one thing about both photo reference and the use of certain pre-built brushes, which is, and again, pulling it back a little bit. Yeah. Make sure that it fits within the style, the tone, the line art, the line width, the line thickness of your style, because if it stands out at all, it has failed at its job. Yeah. The job is to work seamlessly with your comic. And Brad, I think, has just enough walks the line of comics and realism in Evil Inc. that he could probably use that shattered glass. And people are like, oh, that's akin to Brad's style. I'm sure no one even noticed, because Brad uses a fair amount of realism. In Sheldon, I think, maybe 4 or 5 steps away from Brad in terms of realism. So my settings are far more cartoony. There's a lot of brushes that Brad could probably get away with that I couldn't, and maybe vice versa. If it's a goofy line, maybe I could use it, but Brad wouldn't. Which, all I'm saying is, if it's a photo reference or a brush that doesn't fit into your world, I would highly advise against that, because that breaks the fourth wall. It makes people aware of the artifice and the construction of the comic, and not just the comic itself.
I'll go one step. I'll say it right out loud. I will trace a car at the drop of a hat, instead of sitting there and building that car up and trying to get all those parts straight. I will trace a car without thinking twice. I'll find good photo reference and I'll trace it. Part of that is I can, because I've set my world in kind of a realistic world. Dave, if he wants to trace a car, he's going to have to first kind of Photoshop manipulate that car. So that
here's what I do. I transform warp it. I make it look like something like the UAP style, animation style from the 50s,
because you have to.
Yes, that's more my style, but transform warp in Photoshop is great for that.
And then you're gonna trace it a lot more loosely. I'm gonna trace it much more closely. You're gonna trace it loosely. But we're both tracing a photo, because, honest to God, who's got time to sit there and draw a car? Not me. I got a life to live, and my readers don't freaking care if I drew that car from scratch or traced it. What they care about is the image at the end of the day, and that's okay. That's perfectly. We need to say it. We need to say it. It's okay. Do you want it? Now, again, this is not a carte blanche as the French would say. That means a white carte.
Magnifique,
blanche.
Brad. That was
That's
fantastic.
Right. This is not carte blanche to go out and trace everything and trace somebody else's work and trace my comic and call it your own and all those other things that that people might be hoping that we're going to say. No, that's not that at all. And you should be a little bit careful about what photo reference you select for yourself as well, because remember, every photo is the creative property of the photographer who made that photograph.
Yes, absolutely.
So think about that as well.
Yep.
But when it comes to that, when it comes to using Clip Studio 3D models, 3D objects, and so on and so forth, I will tell you without a doubt, my anatomy got much better once I started using 3D models. And there was a learning curve to that. They looked a little bit wonky there for a while until I learned how to get those, because you can't use necessarily out of the box 3D models.
Again, you have to run it through your filter.
Adjust them to your proportions of how your characters work.
Right.
You do all of those things, but it doesn't make you any less of an artist because, as Dave said a few minutes ago, there's a great documentary. I've told you about it before. It's called Tim's Vermeer. And it talks about this guy named Tim, who was not an artist, that wanted to recreate a Vermeer painting and used this equipment that Vermeer used and was able to do it, very well to a very high degree of quality. He painted a masterpiece level painting. This is the tools that we have, and to not use the tools, let's face it, at the end of the day, if you're one of these people who says that you shouldn't use specialty brushes, you shouldn't use the 3D models, you shouldn't use this, you shouldn't do that in digital art, where do you draw the line? Are you going to start creating your own ink as well? Are you going to use egg whites to build and make your own paints the way
Brad,
Leonardo did?
I've got to go catch my own mollusks to make the purple that I want, Brad.
Yes,
it's the only way.
I mean, at what point do you start being an actual artist? Are you going out there raising sable so that you can have a true sable brush?
Welcome to Dave Kellett's Sable Farm. How you doing? I'm raising sable to pluck, pluck, pluck. Here we go. I'm making that brush.
Are you pulling those hairs out of your own head? You know what? Because you know, at what point are you an artist? Well, listen, the artist uses the tools in front of them, and again, the readers don't care.
Brad, I serve you a beautiful meal. There's steak cooked to perfection. The vegetables are roasted just right. The potatoes are beyond par. The dessert, it carries you to another level. But then at the end, I say, but I used a recipe book.
Yeah.
Do you hate the meal now?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
You go, that was a delicious meal. So what I'm saying is, it just as a basic example from daily life, is that it's the final product that people care about. If it fits within your world, if it fits within your style,
yeah.
If you've run it through your filter, if you've used your artistic skills to create with it, you don't need to feel guilty about that. Yeah. That's using a tool that you, as intended, to help you speed along a process that used to take much longer and now thankfully can go a little bit quicker.
That cooking example is so great because my wife does this all the time. And she's an amazing cook. All you need to do is take a look at me from college and look at me now and see that she's an amazing cook. Every year I show the signs of her cooking prowess. But every now and again, I'll be sitting there, you know, with my mouth half full saying, this is amazing. It is so good. And she'll say, well, it doesn't count. I started with a can of Campbell's cream of mushroom soup, after all. And she discounts herself, you know. But meanwhile, the things she did to that, it was just a base. It was starting, right? She did this entire dish out of that started that way, but she doesn't think it counts unless she created the roux herself, right? And it's like, no, this counts. This is good. This is amazing. It doesn't matter that you did that. Although every now and again, I'll torque her and I'll say, delicious, just like my mom used to open. but in all truthfulness, it doesn't matter. If you start with your own visual equivalent of Campbell's cream of mushroom soup, you are still an excellent cook.
Yes. So listen, with that, I think both Brad and I would say you're off to the races. Use the tools wisely, experiment with them, have fun, incorporate them into your style, run them through your filter, and best of luck to you. All right, Brad. Well, our next question from patreon.com/ComicLab comes from Jerry. And Jerry writes, what are the best news websites for comic creators? When I was teaching animation, I had the Animation World Network site as my homepage. When I got involved with video games, I switched over to GameDeveloper.com. Now that I'm creating my own webcomic, I'd like to be informed of what's going on in that field on a daily basis.
Yeah.
Thanks for your fun and informative podcast. Brad, I ask you because we have gone through a couple of cycles, news cycles, quite literally, of news sites coming and going. What, Brad, are the current resources for comics online?
I don't know of any that I'm comfortable recommending. I'll be honest with you. And before, I know that a whole portion of our audience just opened up their phone and are madly emailing us their suggestions. Chances are I know the one that you're going to email and suggest, and I'm going to roll my eyes when you send it. So please don't. I don't know that there are any good ones. There are a lot of them that cater very much to the big two, Marvel and DC. Yep. And comics is so much more than that it takes them out of the running.
Well, and I'll tell you, even worse, Brad, if for any one of us who have ever worked in journalism or in Brad's case, or in my case in marketing, you know that all those sites that cater to the big two, they are barely warmed over press releases. That's all they are. The whole site is barely warmed over press releases. So you're not getting any sort of journalism. You're getting press releases.
If it's just not warmed over, it might just, speaking of copy and paste, it might have just been a copy and paste press release. You know, it just might be bang, bang, there it is. Bleeding Cool was always one of the ones that would make this list. But I got to tell you, in the past several years, Bleeding Cool has been taken over so badly by aggressive advertising that every once in a while when I've had so many bad experiences, I stopped clicking links that went to Bleeding Cool. But every now and again, I was really tempted. I really wanted to read the article. And I'd click the link and I would get so beset, so attacked by aggressive advertising that very quickly I was like, quitting my browser, running away from the computer screen physically. Like I could not nope out strongly enough.
Throwing bleach on the keyboard. Yeah, exactly.
There's that scene from Airplane, if you remember that movie from the 70s, where the guy's trying to make it through the airport and people are trying to stop him and talking to him, and he finally starts punching him and throwing him. And it's very much like that. You cannot read anything on that site because of all the aggressive advertising. So I stopped going there, and I don't recommend it. Fleen was always good. But Fleen hasn't been updating lately.
No,
right?
Gary, I think has stopped, and it might be permanent. And to Gary's great credit, it was many years of delight at Fleen.com, FLEEN.com. But I think Gary has stepped away from it, perhaps permanently. Another one that has also ended that I found great value was comicsreporter.com. Tom Spurgeon, rest his soul, had an untimely death about, I don't know, Brad, 3 years ago, 4 years ago.
I bet you it was a while ago at this point. I want to say 5, because 3 years ago was pandemic, and I think this was pre-pandemic.
Yeah, Tom was previously a reporter at the Comics Journal and did actual genuine long-form investigative comics journalism at the Comics Reporter that was of great value. And he looked at indie, he looked at webcomic, he looked at autobio, he looked at the big two or the big three, if you want to include image. And, he did all of it on one site, and it was a really good site. And bless him, passed away about 3-4 years ago. And so that's over with. And so I don't know, Brad, that I have anything that I can recommend that I enjoy anymore.
Or that has value to what comics really is. There's a couple also that cater very much towards syndicated comics, right? But
like
again,
Daily Cartoonist,
there's no real news in syndicated comics. Those guys are treading water, hoping not to drown. There's nothing going on there, and of course, comics is so much wider than syndicated comics.
This is matters not at all, but there is a tiny potential for someone to start a sort of web journalism for the webtoons side of things.
Yeah,
because that kind of American European take on Japanese comics in a webtoons Infinite Scroll, that audience is massive, and it's interesting that there's no real journalism around that yet. So that's just more of a curiosity. But as far as what we could recommend, the truth is I don't know. If it's hard to make money in comics, boy, is it even harder to make money in journalism about comics.
Yeah.
So you just don't see people flooding into the market to say like, that's where the gold is. You know, I'm going to go make my money in comics journalism. It literally is like Big Bird going to New York to break into public television. It's like, why would you break into comics journalism? You know?
Yeah. And quite frankly, it's probably why all these sites have such massively aggressive advertising is that crowdfunding. I don't know that that's a particularly good fit for them these days.
Maybe Patreon, I suppose, but I don't know what they would offer that.
It's that all builds around that whole idea of community and community identity. And and more and more, I'm convinced that there are fewer and fewer people who consider themselves comics readers. Don't get that confused. There's more people reading comics than ever before. I'm convinced of that. But there are fewer people who self-identify as comics readers as ever before. And in fact, I guarantee you, if you got a comic on Webtoons, I will guarantee you those many of those people reading comics on Webtoons do not consider themselves comics readers. They won't even tell you they read a comic.
They might not even think of what they read as a comic. They're like, I love this story that I'm reading called blankety blank, you know, that kind of thing. So yeah, I agree with you about that. Yeah.
And that makes community building difficult. And remember, crowdfunding is all about building the crowd first and then getting the funding. You have no identity for that crowd, and then crowdfunding is going to be tough.
So what resources can we point you to? Well, honestly, a show like this is you're going to find 5 or 6 versions of this kind of thing in the industry. A couple for comic books, a couple for graphic novels, some for indie comics creators, some for creativity in general. You'll find amazing sites like webcomics.com, Brad's amazing resource, which is more of a how-to nuts and bolts, build a career, be an artist, create the thing, get the thing up on the site. But that's not a news site per se, although Brad does sprinkle in some news in there.
Yeah, every now and again.
Yeah, in the same way that we sprinkle in some news every now and again, but not really. That exists, but there's no and every once in a while you'll see more back when Comic Cons were going on, you would see reports from the floor where people would do 5-minute interviews with Sergio Aragonis or with, you know, what have you. But even that has kind of stopped during the pandemic. So I don't know where I would point people or what would be a satisfying answer to this.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to say the next thing and tell me if I'm wrong. What are you looking for from a comics news site anyway? I mean, what are you hoping to read there?
Oh, I'll be honest. I would love one.
Go ahead.
Johnny Cynicism. I would love one. I loved Fleen when it was going, and I loved Comics Reporter when it was going, because I just like staying abreast of what people are doing and like who's doing what projects are going, and what are people talking about that I've not. Because I always assume ignorance. I always assume that I don't know what's going on. I don't know what projects. So I liked having a kind of a sense that, oh, people are going to bring me news of what's happening with other people's careers. What are projects being developed? What things are really humming along in sales? Yeah. And I didn't have access to that, but these news sites did. And I do miss that. I guess,
you know what, you're right, because I'm thinking of comics news sites as they exist now, which are basically, reran press releases, copy paste. Right. What you're talking about, especially Fleen was particularly good at it, was, really what's interesting and what's going on. And you could see things kind of on the horizon by reading them. Oh, there's this person doing something really cool. And I kind of lost touch with that a little bit and was focused more on what it was today. But yeah, somebody bringing something like that back would be a good read.
Did you, back in the day, did you ever read the Wizard physical publications, the Wizard magazine or Comics Journal?
I'm such a geek. I loved Wizard magazine. As soon as I discovered it, I became a subscriber, and I loved it, and I lived everything about it.
Oh, really? I never got into Wizard. I tried to love the Comics Journal. Mm-hmm. But the Comics Journal was always about sad comics. It was always like, here's another comic about a summer I had when I was 19 and I'm sad about it. And I was like, God, really, Comics Journal? This is the only thing we can cover is sad comics? I don't know.
It's all these gravitas comics,
Yeah, comics that,
people, it's comics you read because you feel you have to read them, not necessarily because you want to read them, but because you feel you have to, and it's like, oh, okay. It's the same way it was when mom puts broccoli on your plate and you're like, nah, all right, I'll eat the broccoli. I didn't
So
really
I actually
want to.
I don't even know if Comics Journal is still alive. It was coming out of the Pacific Northwest, wasn't it? Out of Seattle or Oregon or something?
I believe it's that the one I think I checked on that one. I think that's still going. But yeah, I don't drop over there very often.
Brad, as long as there are sad comics, we'll have the Comics Journal.
Hey, if you're listening while you work, take a minute to stand and stretch.
And while you're doing that, we're going to tell you why you should join us on Patreon.
When you do, you're going to get hours and hours of podcasts that we've recorded just for backers.
And exclusive Patreon posts that go even deeper on ComicLab topics.
And access to our exclusive Discord server, which is a thriving community of professional cartoonists.
So you can support the show you love and get tons of actionable resources for your own cartooning.
And listen, if you can't swing a pledge this month, we get it. No worries.
Yeah, listen, you can still support the show by rating us wherever you get your podcasts.
Just leave a 5-star review and a few kind words.
That, along with mentions on social media, is incredibly helpful.
Now, everybody, let's talk comics.
All right, Brad. Well, our next question comes in from patreon.com/comiclab, and it's Helfried writing. For this question, I would like to ask you to take your creator's hat off for a short moment. Like probably all creators, I like reading comics, especially long-form comics. I've listened to your show and have heard you de-incentivize using hashtags on Twitter and using webcomics lists. So my question is, as a reader, how do I find good long-form comics, especially if they're not on Webtoons or Tapas? I use Insta and Twitter and keep an eye open, but the algorithm favors one-shots over long-form any day. How would someone find Evil Ink or Drive not knowing they exist? I'm really interested to hear your opinions. Then I can put the creator hat back on and make sure that my comic can be found as well. Love your show. And folks, please listen to the comic samples. I did and nearly doubled my Patreon income within a month because of them. Hot diggity dog. That's coming in from Helfried. By the way, Helfried writes, I'm a writer and suck at drawing, so my more talented wife gets a Wacom one for her birthday. That's fantastic.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah.
Well, doubling someone's income, Bradley J, by any traditional mafioso method, we should get a little slice of that. I think 10% to Brad Geiger should be.
We should get a little kickback for that.
Exactly.
Well, that was, you remember on the, we did that show where we just talked about, the mistakes you're making on Patreon and how to do better.
Right.
And I said, every now and again, I'll see somebody kind of struggling on Patreon and I'll slide into the DMs and I'll say, hey, I've got a few thoughts.
Don't use the phrase slide into the DMs.
I slide.
Oh, geez. I'm very uncomfortable.
And this was one of those conversations where I said, hey, I've got some thoughts. And this person took a large number of those thoughts and applied them and just got instant results. And so many of it, I mean, it sounds like I'm peddling snake oil. A lot of it was just adjusting his tiers. All of these suggestions were the stuff that I talked about on that show, where I said, here's the mistakes you're making.
Right.
We adjusted those tiers and everything snapped right into place. And as this person continues to do that, I think they're going to get the same results. I guarantee it, because it's just all it is kind of getting your business in line. So having said that, now I'm gonna say this. There's a lot about this question that I'm desperate to talk about, and I'm going to start in the middle. First of all, I want to talk about the creator's hat, because you said you took your creator's hat off, but actually you've got your creator's hat very much on. In fact, it might be pulled down over your eyes a little bit. I want you to lift that up a little bit. This is all creator's hat stuff. In fact, another way of looking at it is market research versus mirror research, and you are very much engaging in mirror research here. And I'm gonna show you why that is. Okay. But before I do that, I want to shoot right to the middle of the question. Listen to this part of the question. I use Instagram and Twitter, and I keep my eye open, but the algorithm favors one-shots over long form any day. Stop right there. The algorithm favors what you, Helfried, are paying attention to. That's how the algorithm works. It's not pushing one thing over another. It can't. It's all it favors is what you are clicking on, what you are slowing your scroll for. Helfried, you're slowing yourself. The only way that a certain type of comic makes it into your algorithm is that you're paying attention to it. Okay, it can't be any other way. That's why on TikTok, I've got a ridiculous amount of very young women saying how much they love dad bods. That's not the algorithm forcing that. That's because I keep slowing down when it happens. That's the algorithm. The algorithm is giving you what you are paying attention to. Okay, it's not forcing things on you. It's giving you what you are paying attention to. That's how algorithms work. And
well, I at this point, because I know I can sense you have a longer thing. I would like to politely disagree a little bit with you as a friend. Go ahead. I think it absolutely takes into account what has worked on you in the past. Did you slow down and expressed interest in Jaguar cars? All right, we're going to show you more Jaguar cars. Did you like dinosaurs? All right, we're going to show you dinosaurs. But I think the algorithm is far more complex and says if and then statements. If Brad slowed down at Jaguar cars, then you know what? Every once in a while, we're going to throw in a Land Rover or a Range Rover. Maybe he likes British cars in general. See what he finds interesting, And so it finds from other patterns from other users, kind of like how Amazon does with recommendation engines. It has in the mix. Hey, if you like this, you'll probably like this, or you mix that in. So it's still springboarding off what you've expressed interest in. But there also, it starts to force in a wider series of interests that has found great success with similar audiences, and knowing that it might have a high probability of succeeding with you, So there's no doubt that the algorithm does that. They're basically just trying to cement you on the platform for as long as possible. So they're using, recommendation engines like that. Yeah.
And we can take. I'll give you that one a little bit. I don't 100% agree with you there, but I'll give you that, and I'll even throw in one more for your side of the argument that I think most short form comics creators have an easier time on social media than long form. I think long form does have an additional challenge to social media. And it's not that you can't do it, but I think most long form creators that I see are not doing a good job of it because they're not putting their creativity into how they are putting their long form comic out there. And for a short form, it just comes naturally. Right. To promote a long form comic on social media, I think you've got to use some creativity. And I see that lacking in most long form social media outreach that come across my purview. So I'll even give you that. But let's go a little bit further here. And that is this. Nobody woke up this morning saying, oh, I'd like to find a long form comic to read. That's because civilians don't use those terms. In fact, like I just talked about at the first half of the show, most of your readers don't consider themselves comics readers. No, the only person that ever said, I'd like to find a long form comic to read is other cartoonists and other comics artists. We use terms like that. We use terms like long form, short form, gag a day, slice of life, all of that. We use those terms. The only readers who use those terms are the more highly engaged ones that are using it because they've heard us use it. Right. Okay. But by and large, and that's great. Highly engaged readers are wonderful. But if you want to build a career, you want to focus on that bigger area of audience that does not necessarily consider themselves comics readers. That's where your career is going to be found, in assembling those people. And those people did not wake up this morning looking for a long form comic. They don't even have the words in their vocabulary, I'm going to argue. So where do you find or where does someone find this stuff? The answer, and this has been true for many years now, and it's going to be true for a long time after today's podcast, is social media. That's where the communication happens. The main platforms for social media is where you're going to find out about this stuff. And that means you, as a long form creator, need to rethink how you're putting your stuff out there on social media. And we have talked about long form strategies for social media on this show. I'm not going to go back over it again. We've talked about strategies for doing this on the show. But I think you need to, number one, realize that your first swing on this is going to be social media, your outreach on social media. Your second thing is going to be those platforms like Webtoons and Tapas and things like that. Again, focusing on the vertical scroll, focusing on longer story swings, getting away from this 4 and 5 panel approach and doing longer story swings to give yourself a better chance at cementing that reader when you do get to them. But I really want to caution you against this mirror research of thinking, well, how would I, if I was a reader, where would I go to find a long form comic? They're not looking. They're not thinking that way. They're scrolling through an endless supply of content, and your job is to slow them down. Their job is to say, hey, look at this. Now I'm interested. They weren't looking for you today.
Right.
The question goes, how would somebody find Evil Ink or Drive not knowing they exist? They would, one of two things. Somebody's going to retweet me because I put a share thought into that post and somebody actually shared it. Yeah. Or they're going to see some kind of other reference that is tangential. And the more good work you're putting out into the world, the more these tangents spring up and start to happen. It all goes back to those to that idea of frequent, consistent, and significant that we've talked about time and time again. But the biggest trap you can fall into is thinking that somebody woke up this morning thinking they want to find a long form comic. It didn't happen. Cartoonists do that. Cartoonists think that way. But the people that you want to build your audience out of, they don't think that way. They're just scrolling social media, and that's when you got to catch them.
Ooh, I got a lot of thoughts to add to this because this is a fun conversation. So let's talk first about frequent, consistent, and substantive in terms of your updates. I find it very interesting that after 10 or 15 years of doing it one way, probably 10 years, Netflix is now realizing that HBO and Disney and the rest are eating their lunch because people don't necessarily want to binge things all at once. And this is related to webcomics. What they want is frequent, consistent, and substantive. They want a weekly check-in or a regular check-in. People like that. It turns out that date TV was something that people liked. They kind of didn't want that binge model. Because it gives a chance to grow the audience for Disney Plus. It gives a chance for people to build emotions and to talk theories and strategies. It turns out people really like that. But when you can binge the whole thing all at once, you take all of that away. It doesn't give a chance to build an audience. So even Netflix now is looking to go towards the Disney Plus model of going back to weekly appointment television rather than binging all at once. So that's point number one. Go ahead, Brad. You want to chime in?
Well, I just want to jump, and I'm going to throw it right back to you. But the other reason that they're doing it is another very good business reason for webcomics. The other reason to do that is because it keeps you subscribing longer, month after month after month. If you binge something all in April, you're not sticking around for May unless they've got another great binge in May. But if they can spread that series out from April, May, and June, now they've got 3 months to come up with something else that they can put you on the hook for. If they do that on June 29th, they can keep you for subscribing for another 3 months. So it's a good business move for a subscription model as well. But go ahead, go on to number 2.
Right. So how does that relate to long form? It just says, I personally would strongly advise frequent, consistent, and substantive updates rather than big chapter dumps, which is some people like to do with long form, thinking like, well, the only way to hook a long form reader is to give them it all at once. Well, I would actually argue the opposite, is that frequent, consistent, and substantive is actually the better way to do. So that's number 1. Number 2 is I do slightly disagree with my friend Brad on long form on social media, in the sense that Brad, to his great credit, thinks it's far more doable than I do. I personally feel like we all need to come to the realization that TikTok, because they're eating Instagram's lunch, Instagram is weighting their displayed new stuff to you far more towards video than it ever was when Instagram started, right? Like if you open Instagram right now and go to the search button, the one that looks like the Sherlock Holmes magnifying glass, right? I would guarantee that more than 50% of the things on that first screen are going to be video to you. They'll either, the tallest one, the double tall, will be a video, and then at least 50% of the screen will have the little video icon in the upper right corner, because video keeps you on the app longer.
Mhm.
It's more visually arresting. It stops you scrolling and it keeps you there, right? So all those, but and the second is also true, which is I think short form is an easier read. It's snappier. It is more suited for things like Instagram, and so Instagram is going to show you more single panel, I think, than it will long form. It just doesn't read well on Instagram. It doesn't share well. Twitter is actually, especially in the last week's launch of the new TweetDeck, which I don't like, is also going heavily visual from a more substantive text-based system. Maybe that's good for comics, maybe not. I'm not so sure. But it's interesting that they're all slowly finding their way towards video, which is not great for us. But we have to acknowledge that maybe Instagram is becoming increasingly less helpful for cartoonists from an already somewhat unhelpful spot. So how my advice for long form is, and this is incredibly painful to hear, make a really damn good long form comic. People find Drive because it's damn good sci-fi, and people that love sci-fi will tell other people on sci-fi. They'll either do it on social media, they'll retweet me on certain pages with comments, they will share it in forums for sci-fi lovers, and so making a really good comic is a great way. It is the foundational way to get people to spread the word about it and to get it out there. So such that when I do frequent, consistent, and substantive updates of Drive on Twitter or on other places, it's more likely, as Brad said, to have that network of sharing because people have built up the love for it on their own. Brad, more thoughts from you, my friend?
I'm definitely listening to your advice on this because you do a short form and a long form comic. And you, of the two, you've told us in the past that the long form comic is definitely the more powerful one on the web. It gets the bigger bang for the buck. It's your more lucrative audience, right?
Yes, but this is the big caveat. Short form gets shared far more, both by me and by others independently without me ever doing anything. They will tweet it on their own. Yeah. Drive does not get that. It does not get the shares. It does not get the likes. But boy, once it hooks people because it's a damn good story, people really dive in and they're like, holy shit, I'm going to spend some money on this. And then they buy all the books or they buy all the prints right. So it oddly enough makes me way more money than Sheldon, even though Sheldon ostensibly has a much bigger social media audience. Right. And it's not lost on me in terms of my planning out my future. That differentiation. One brings me great joy to share because it's I can be silly, I can be broad, I can be and that's Sheldon in this case. I can go into topics I wouldn't normally go into. It's delightful. I love it, and there's immediate sort of serotonin hit when I see the likes and the shares. But the books don't sell as well. And so how do you build a career? Well, maybe it's a mix of both. I don't know. Maybe that's my loss leader to get people to Drive. At this point, I'm not sure.
No, and that's not it's not unusual to have something like that where you've got something that is a loss leader pulling people in and then redirecting them from Drive. I do the same thing with my safer work and not safer work. The safe work is definitely a loss leader. But I think the overall push here that you and I would both agree on is that the main conduit there is going to be found on social media. That is going to be the main conduit. And it is possible to build that path using a long form comic. And I think we would both agree that we have to take a very hard look at how we are presenting long form on social media, and in order to make that happen. In other words, it's not going to be a knee-jerk kind of social media. It's not going to be set it and forget it. It's not going to be make a post without thinking about share thoughts and all of that kind of thing. It is going to have to be a part of, you're going to have to put some thought into how you're doing it. I don't think either one of us is going to say it's impossible. And I will go 100% and agree with you that short form definitely it comes more naturally to social media. It's a much better fit. I think all of us, myself included, who are doing long form have our work cut out for you. However, I don't see a better option. In other words, at the top of the question, it says, well, you said that Twitter hashtags are no good, and you said the web comics lists are no good. So what is there left? Well, saying that this is difficult to do doesn't make Twitter hashtags magically better. And it doesn't make them work. It doesn't make webcomics lists magically good. It just means that that number one, everybody is using social media to communicate, or at least that's where the main parts of your audience is. And until we build something else, until something else starts to gain steam, and you see people, trying to get something happening, and you remember my premonition that something is going to come around after social media, and it's going to be RSS based. I still think that. I still think that that's hovering out there somewhere. But in the meantime, while we're dealing with now, what we have now, the answer is social media and be creative. That's my best answer I can give you.
Yeah, well, and I will give you one more, which is, and maybe it's so basic that we forgot to mention it, have a website. Because trying to build a long form comic on social media is nigh impossible. You got to have something with that allows for an archive dive. And again, I would just say that I super agree with Brad that social media is all we got, so you got to use it in terms of spreading. But be aware that of the two, I think Twitter is more handy for long form.
Yes.
I personally feel increasingly like Instagram does us no favors, does us zero favors. As cartoonists. I'm not sure going forward how I'm going to interact with Instagram, because again, I don't know what it is, 4 or 5 times the quote unquote readers on Instagram. I can't motivate them to do a damn thing when it comes to go on a Kickstarter or back a Patreon or buy a book. Instagram intentionally has made that such an impossible walled garden that you can't direct anybody off there without effort on their part. Like go to my bio, and then on my bio, find the link. And then from the link, it's like, well, we all know how that works for the average person.
And by the way, like you said, that's a feature, not a bug. That's not a mistake that Instagram has done that. Yeah.
That's for them. Yeah. As a Facebook owned property, they're making an increasingly walled garden. And I get it. I know why they're doing it. And again, they're trying to push. First, it was pushing videos, and then it was pushing reels. And so I see cartoonists increasingly try to dance that dance, but I don't want to be a video creator. If I wanted to be a video creator, I would have gone into video. I want to be a cartoonist, And so the way I can do it is, the way I know how to control it is make the best damn comic I can, get it out on social media in all the ways that I can, with frequent, consistent, substantive, and using share statements and using things that try to engage people in new and different ways. And that's all you can do. There's the other solutions are like web rings or hashtags. They might, go ahead, go with God, use them. I don't know, to Brad's point, that they'll help you at all, just because wishing doesn't make it so.
I can't agree more. Dave, we've got time for one last question here on the show, and I wanted to pitch it to you. This comes in from our friend Tyler Mann, who's part of our Patreon community. And he says, with Kickstarter's add-ons and backer kit, etc., is there any reason to have more than one Kickstarter tier anymore, since backers can customize and add on anything they want afterwards? So, Dave, one tier, goodbye. What do you think?
No, I don't think so. I don't think we're in that world. And for a couple of reasons, both from marketing standpoint and from shipping standpoint, I think that's a bad idea. And so which one should we go through first? Let's go through shipping first. When you're planning out a Kickstarter, Brad and I have advised heavily in the past, you have to take a couple of weeks to plan out your costs, to plan out your storage fees, to plan out how much it's going to cost to buy the shipping containers, the boxes, the bags, the tape, all that, and to price out how much this is going to cost you to send it from Des Moines to Tuscaloosa, or from Alabama to Alaska. So you've got to price that out, because especially when you get to international shipments, it can bankrupt you, legit bankrupt you, if you haven't priced out how much it costs to ship the same book from Alabama versus Australia. Because you go from $4 to $45, and you send a couple thousand of those. Guess what? That's trouble if you didn't price that out right. So you've got to price out the shipping. And if you suddenly have this thing where everything's an add-on, hey, it's a party, come on, add it. If there's one tier and it's all add-ons, well, then I guarantee you don't have a good shipping system in place to account for those costs of shipping, even to Alabama, never mind to Australia. So number one is you've got to price out the shipping. Number two is the marketing. And this is as old as 20th century capitalism goes, which is the very early successes that McDonald's had was because they offered a small a medium and a large when it came to drinks.
Yes.
It wasn't just
Yeah.
a standard sit-down restaurant where you got a drink and that was it. McDonald's gave you the benefit of choice, and with the perception of choice, you're more likely. It's like that M&M's marketing thing that they always talk about. You're more likely to eat more M&Ms because there's different colors of M&Ms. It stirs the mind. It gets you excited. It's some kind of weird animal response, lizard brain response, that you have this perception of choice. And so when McDonald's offers you a small, medium, large, hey, you're slightly more likely to order fries with it too, because you have this choice, Yep. And so Kickstarters, the tiers work because they give you that perception of choice. And in so doing, it kind of triggers that lizard brain of shopping that goes, I'm interested in this. And Brad, what other reasons? Because I know you got more about why you want to offer choices.
Well, think about Kickstarter, and this also goes for Patreon tiers, but think about Kickstarter as walking your reader up a ladder, right? And this is salespersonship 101. You get the person to kind of commit early with a low price for a basic reward. Hey, if you'd like this book, you can get it. A $10 pledge gets you the PDF.
Yeah.
Now, everybody's out there saying, hey, that sounds great. $10 for a PDF. Wonderful. I already like this comic. I want to see it do well. I'm in. And as soon as they're in, that's when you start walking them. And this is how you make money in this venture. Because once they're in for $10, you go, hey, and I'm just going to make numbers up here as I go along. For $20, you can get the book. Oh, well, wait a minute. Of course, I want the book for $20 instead of the PDF for $10. Well, then for $30, you can have the book plus this other thing. This is fantastic. I want this book plus the other thing. And then you keep walking them up, adding substantial rewards every rung until finally they get to that one thing that it's too expensive and they don't really want the reward that you're offering at that level. And then they don't go all the way back down to the bottom rung. They go back down one, maybe two tops, but usually they just go back down one rung. And that's where you've got them. Now, if you've got a one-tier Kickstarter, you've got a one-rung ladder, right? Which is no ladder. And you're kind of cutting yourself off at the knees because you're giving away an awful lot of money. Now, the add-ons are good when you have a large library of other thing, and that ladder is going to start to get confusing, right? Well, you can have book 1 and book 2, or you could have book 1 and book 3, or you could have book 2 and book 4, or maybe you want book 5 and book 3, or maybe you want book 8, book 7, and book 1. Well, at that point, it's getting too confusing. And now it's to your best interest to pull back a little bit, not all the way up back to a one-rung ladder, but to pull back and say, okay, here's the Kickstarter for book 6. And now you can have books 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 as add-ons, right? That's what an add-on is for, is to make that process more simple. But the heart of the Kickstarter is still walking your reader up the ladder with significant rewards. And pay attention to the rest of the sentence, significant rewards that you have included into the cost analysis of your Kickstarter goal. And that includes the cost of manufacturing, the cost of shipping to you, and the cost of shipping to the end user. All of those costs are factored into all of those rungs that you built up all the way up and down. All of that is built in, but you still need a full ladder. You still need that act of walking up because, like Dave said, nobody walks out of McDonald's, or few people walk out of McDonald's with a small Coke. If you're thirsty and you want a small, for just a couple cents more, you can get a medium. And then you're like, yeah, I'd like a medium. Well, gee whiz, for just another nickel or so, you can get a large. And by the time you're done, you've got a bucket of Coke sitting there going, I'm never going to drink all of this. I'm not going to drink half of this. Right. But that's exactly how that marketing works. And it's for the best interest to the artist, the independent creator that's building that ladder. That's how you stay in business.
And you might say, well, look, and I just want to offer the book tier. I just want the book tier. That's all I want to offer. And that's fine. You and I and Brad all know that the majority of people are going to back just the book. But again, going back to McDonald's with that perception of choice, What it does is for the people that do actively choose that tier, there is a weird consumer sense of satisfaction of I'm being the savvy consumer. I'm making the right choice. And we make fun of that as sort of modern post-capitalist people, but that still exists, legit still exists in the human mind that they go, I'm being the savvy consumer. I didn't pick the $50 level. I didn't pick the $10 level. I'm savvy. I picked the $25 level because that's where the best value for me is, right? And it's odd that works, but it does work. And by the way, it doesn't work at the same price point for every person. Someone who's wealthy might be like, I'm savvy. I picked the $500 price point because it came with original art. Or I'm savvy because I'm a college student, so I picked the ebook at the $5, $10, $15 mark. What I'm getting at is people are different. People walk different walks of life. So the perception of choice fits the different walks of life and lets them feel like a savvy consumer on their level. It meets them where they are.
Yeah. Absolutely. And that's what you need to do. You need to meet them where they are. And by the way, you need to meet Dave and I where we're going to be next week when we bring you another episode of Comic Lab, the show about making comics and making a living from comics.
Your hosts have been my friend Brad Guigar, the ever delightful pal of mine, the editor of webcomics.com and the creator of Evil Inc. at evil-comic.com.
And my good friend Dave Kellett, the co-director of Stripped, and the cartoonist of Sheldon at sheldoncomics.com and Drive at drivecomic.com.
And the Comic Lab theme song is used with permission from Andy Creighton at theworldrecord.net. And this episode was edited by our pal Matt Woodard of Woodsong Productions over at www.woodsong.media.
If you love Comic Lab, you can rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts, and you may hear your review featured on a future episode.
And Comic Lab is made possible by your support on patreon.com/comiclab. So we'll go ahead and say that twice. Patreon.com/Are you not entertained? Well, Brad, you know, the Comics Journal was famous for its sad comics. You know, nothing got celebrated more in the Comics Journal than if you had a depressing comic. And Brad, you had a particularly favorite sad comic. I believe it was a Ziggy, was it not, my friend? The favorite Ziggy of yours?
Yeah, I remember my favorite Ziggy comic, and I just saw it on one of these news sites. They were doing a retrospective. It had a Ziggy comic there, and the caption read, I ordered a personal pan pizza and it came out looking pretty sad. And frankly, that feels pretty personal.
I'm Ziggy. Welcome to the Comics Journal, Ziggy.